Two quick points. One, Zhao Li, you pointed out that the United States is this awesomely powerful country, which I think is true. But it's very important to understand that we no longer live in a unipolar world, that we do live in a multipolar world. There are three great powers in the system, and although the United States is the most powerful state among those three great powers, I think the United States is the most powerful, China's the second most powerful, and Russia's the third most powerful. The fact is, the world today is fundamentally different than it was, say, in the 1990s when we were in unipolarity. And I think the Americans have had a very difficult time coming to grips with the fact that we're no longer in unipolarity. A lot of American leaders want to act as if it's still a unipolar world, and it's not. And the United States has to be much more careful because it's dealing with two other great powers, both Russia and China. Second point I would make has to do with Ukraine. I think, as Professor Dugin said, there are all these sort of heterogeneous forces at play inside Ukraine that were there independent of NATO expansion or Western policy. I've always thought, since the Soviet Union broke apart and Ukraine was created, that there was the potential for civil war. I'm not saying it was going to happen, period, but in the early 1990s, I thought there was a serious chance that what happened in the Balkans might happen inside of Ukraine. But the key point here is that NATO expansion, EU expansion, and the color revolutions, those three policies in tandem basically helped exacerbate and make worse all of those tensions inside of Ukraine. And that's why the situation blew up in 2014. You want to remember, there was no serious trouble. There was no fighting inside of Ukraine until 2014. And what happened in 2014 was in good part a consequence of Western policy. There was a coup inside of Ukraine that the United States played a key role in making happen. We were interested in doing social engineering inside of Ukraine. This is what the Orange Revolution was all about. We wanted to bring Ukraine not only into NATO, we wanted to bring it into the EU. And what this did was it took all those heterogeneous forces that were at play already inside of Ukraine, it exacerbated them, and the situation blew up, number one, inside Ukraine, and number two, between Russia and Ukraine, and between Russia and the West. And here we are today.
I'm going to switch gear a little bit to bring China into the fold, since the both of you mentioned it also that since Trump's re-election, there's been quite a bit of speculation about how the U.S. is now going to realign its foreign policy, and it is about to drive a wedge between the emergent alliance between Russia and China. How likely, question to both of you, how likely do you see that happening?
I'll answer that very quickly. I think it's clearly in America's interest, speaking as a strategist, for the United States to be allied with Russia. And that way, the United States can concentrate on containing China. And as you know, I've long argued that the United States should try to prevent China from dominating Asia, from becoming a regional hegemon. And I think it makes no strategic sense for the United States to drive the Russians into the arms of the Chinese, which of course we have done with our foolish policies. So your question is it likely that we will change our policy and that we will end up having good relations with Russia and, in a sense, separating the Russians from the Chinese? I think there is hardly any chance that that's going to happen, because I think, as we were discussing before, there's hardly any chance that relations between the United States and Russia are going to change anytime soon. And in fact, I believe, sadly, that the United States and Russia are going to be bitter enemies for the foreseeable future. And the end result of that is the United States is going to continue to try to damage Russia, to hurt Russia. And as a consequence of that, the Russians will have very close relations with the Chinese because the Americans have their gun sights on China as well. You have this situation where the United States has its gun sights on both Russia and China. And unsurprisingly, Russia and China have become, I think it's fair to say, close allies. Maybe not formal allies, but close allies, as they should be. And it doesn't make strategic sense for the United States, for sure. But doing things that make strategic sense is not something that the United States pays much attention to these days. So that's the sad state of affairs here in America.
So that is a very correct explanation and description, as long as I understand. I would say that I am a little more optimistic about strategical sense in Trump's future administration. I observe some trends inside of appointments and some people that I have contact with from newly established American Trump's administration that are the signs that maybe, I hope, there will be more strategical dimension in the future American policy, international relations. Relying on these sources or these presumptions, I would say, I could say that Trump will try to rebalance a little bit relations with Russia and China in favor of Russia and against China. That is not only his subjective, individual understanding, but that is the logic, as Mr. Mearsheimer has said, the logic of strategical attitude. And I think that at some point, the new administration of Trump will try to make not peace, but just to calm down relations with Russia and to try to, I would say, to sabotage these strategical alliance, growing alliance between Russia and China. At least he would try. I think he will try to do that. But at the same time, that is an important thing that this strategical alliance between Russia and China, if we accept and if we agree, and I personally totally agree with Mr. Mearsheimer about the conditions of multipolarity already here, not just in the future, not as desire or plan or expectation, but the correct description of the reality, there are at least 3 complete and established poles: United States, obviously, the West, collective West, Russia and China, or China second and Russia. I agree with this consequence. But we should not forget India, Greater India, emerging as well as independent player. Not on the side of China, not on the side of United States, not on the side of the Russia, but as something independent. And the Islamic world, now very, very weak, I agree, but Islamic world, Africa, Latin America, new emerging poles, maybe would-be poles, the future poles of multipolarity, they are already here. They are already in BRICS. So they are operating on the second level, establishing more and more elements of this multipolar world system. And in that sense, I think that is not about 3-polar vision. So, for example, to tear Russia from China and to get it closer to the United States, it's hardly imaginable, I think. But at the same time, I think that United States, Washington, will try to do that. They will try this strategical approach, and they will fail because it is old-fashioned way of understanding strategy. The strategy of the multipolarity is something totally else. Trump would try to do precisely that, to shift the attention from Russia to China, hostile attention, not positive attention. But I think that multipolarity is much deeper than it looks like now. So the relations between Russia and China are not about just situational alliance against the pressure of the collective West or United States. It's something deeper. And as long as I could judge, Mr. Putin and Mr. Xi Jinping, they understand the strategical depth of the Russian-Chinese alliance, Greater Eurasian Alliance, not just as situational response to the challenge of the mutual situation to be under some attack from the West. It's something further. So maybe we could finally doubt that the West is taller and further. Maybe it is smaller and sees closer to its own misconceptions of the reality. Reality of multipolarity demands the new hates, new positions, new strategical dimension. It is not only just let us keep Russia a bit closer and China a bit further from us. So we need to reconsider the relation on the other terms, and that is a challenge, I think, to the intellectuals of new wave, because the intellectuals of the old wave, they have lost everything. So their understanding of reality has totally failed, absolutely. So we need some new way of multipolar vision of the world, including American interests, including Western interests and values inside, not excluding. So we need to understand and accept the existence of some other, and maybe other, who is hostile to us, but we need to get inside of its brain and to think with him accordingly, not just project our wishful thinking or self-fulfilled prophecy on other. That is my point.
A lot of what's been discussed just now, and on many other occasions that the two of you have been quite outspoken about analysis of the current world affairs, it's essentially a guess game on the intention. So if I can direct this next question to Professor Dugin, is that, I mean, we've had quite a few occasions over the past year to see each other in person, but I've never actually had the opportunity to ask you this. And so let's put it in the background of also the current Ukraine conflict, is that tell us about the intention of Mr. Putin, really, because I've heard this from some friends living in Western Europe also, is that their fear is that should Russia's aggression towards Ukraine go any further, it's not going to stop there. Mr. Putin's ambition is to go even further west. So first fold of the question is that to what extent is that true? What is Mr. Putin's true ambition? And the second question is quite specific about China, really. You are a controversial figure in China, not just because your current reported influence in the Russian administration, but more for what you said quite a few years ago, some almost like 20, 30 years ago, that in your book you said, I may be paraphrasing here because of the translation, so correct me if I'm wrong, but you said, from what you see, China is Russia's most dangerous neighbor to the south, and it must be in Russia's interest to the maximum possibility be dismantled, China as a great power. And from that to what you've been talking about multipolarity, what explains your apparent shift in your ideology or your philosophy?
So it is not quite a few years, but that was more than 30 years ago that I have proposed my geopolitical understanding of the role of China in front of Russia, and that was beginning of the 90s. So it is not quite few years ago. Beginning of the 90s, that was totally different situation. Russia crashed. Russia totally submitted to the Western globalist agenda, unipolar moment, and China, in our eyes, was the kind of accomplice, the power that has betrayed Eastern identity and joined globalization process in order to be the part of the global pro-Western system. That looked like that. Maybe I was wrong already in that way. I could not judge that, but that was the idea of how to consider China being the part of the West, being more and more involved in the globalist economy. And in Russia, present pitiful conditions under Yeltsin, and that was precisely some geopolitical vision of that. China being more and more involved in the West, more and more globalized, and Russia more and more losing its sovereignty. So that was a kind of geopolitical despair, I would say. And the thoughts like that, they belong to this epoch. When I've tried when first of all, when Putin came to power, and second, when Xi Jinping came to power, we, in my eyes, in my Russian patriotic eyes, the situation was very, very different. So we see Russia returning to the global politics, maybe, as Mr. Mearsheimer has said, at third rank, far distant third pole after United States and China. I agree. I don't argue that we are number one. Maybe we are number three, but we are number. We are not nothing. We are number three with nuclear weapon. Number three, it's something. It is not nothing. So, but I agree, that is not about that. And from Putin's time and from Xi Jinping time, I have, and most of all after visiting, thanks to my friends in China, visiting China, teaching in Chinese Institute and Fudan University, and making contacts with different Chinese thinkers, I have a right. More than 20 years ago, it is not few years ago, so more than 20 years ago, I have arrived at the conclusion that China represents the main strategical ally for Russia in constructing multipolar world. And from that time, that is more than 20 years, or maybe more, I started to revise my previous geopolitical attitude of the age of despair of the early 90s. So many times I have explained that, but globalists, they are playing their game. They starting to cut some expressions and terms from previous without context of previous texts, and in order to destroy our relations. So I would say maybe I am not the only one who has changed this. That is much more important than myself. So I am not the only one who has corrected the attitude to China in a much more positive way. So multipolarity is much more than our national interests, than your Chinese national interests, American or Russian. And dealing with this strategical dimension that Mr. Mearsheimer emphasized always and emphasizes now, I think we need to teach the art to not only follow what is good and seems to be right to us in our eyes, but we need to understand other. So when I started to learn what China is, I have totally changed my opinion. So I think that I have missed the point in Chinese involvement in globalization. What point I have missed? I have missed the point that China is still the great power, very national-centered society with the deep Confucianist ethics, and it could not be just socialist as in the West or capitalist. It is something Chinese. We need to understand, to get deeper in exploring the Chinese identity, to understand its behavior, its psychology. And finally, I think I came to the conclusion 20 and more years ago that China is most reliable ally of creating with Russia and other poles, as well as India, not too pro-Chinese, pole, the multipolar system. When we accept that the chess is the play, at least of the game of two players, at least, against Brzezinski, or in the multipolar case, more than two players, three at least, maybe four and more. So we are inside of strategical fields, and I think that we need to put the Russian-Chinese relations precisely in this field if we understand under the word strategy some meaning that Mr. Mearsheimer has explained previously very well.
姐妹们总烦恼脸上细纹、干燥与暗沉，现在起跟我一起放心交给 KS Royal Face 皇家颜值逆时奇迹系列。KS Royal Face 皇家颜值逆时奇迹系列，它添加5种 EGF， 专门防止肌肤老化，强化皮肤修复，增加肌肤弹性水嫩，轻松抚平皱纹，换回青春自信。KS Royal Face 皇家颜值逆时奇迹，活肤露、全效精华、精华霜，即刻启动冻龄密码。